There comes a moment when someone stops fearing you and starts fearing what you've already figured out. That's the moment everything around you shifts, the atmosphere changes, the energy recalibrates, and the person who once thought they were 2 steps ahead suddenly realizes they were playing checkers while you were quietly mapping out the entire board. Not because you were plotting, but because your mind naturally operates with a clarity most people only access after a life crisis, 3 therapy sessions, and a motivational podcast. See, psychologists say that 92% of human reactions are subconscious, meaning most people don't even know why they do half the things they do. But you see the why before they even finish the what, and that's where the panic starts. People around you begin to feel exposed without you ever lifting a finger, like you're some kind of walking human lie detector who refused to read the manual and still mastered the settings. And the funniest part? You didn't sign up for any of this. You were just minding your business, drinking water, focusing on your purpose, and accidentally made someone admit you're a psychological warfare master. Imagine being so good at being yourself that someone else feels like they're in an interrogation scene you never agreed to film. So now we're here, at the intersection of that paranoia and your natural intelligence, the place where your intuition takes off its shoes, sits comfortably and says, "I told you so." Because the truth is, chosen ones don't manipulate environments. Environments just get extremely honest in your presence. And today, we're going to break down exactly why your mere existence made someone confess what they were desperately trying to hide. That you understand the battlefield of the human mind better than they understand themselves. Number 1, they realized you don't argue to win. You observe to expose. Most people enter conversations like they're stepping into a boxing ring. They swing fast, defend themselves too quickly, and panic when they feel misunderstood. They argue to look right, not to understand anything. But you operate differently. You're not chasing victory. You're collecting information. You're paying attention to the exact moment their confidence dips, the shift in their tone, the details they accidentally contradict, and the emotions they try to hide but can't fully control. And that's what unsettles them so deeply. They expected noise, defensiveness, or ego. Instead, you gave them something far more disarming: presence. You listened. You didn't try to overpower them. You let them reveal themselves. The more they talked, the more their story frayed at the edges. They didn't even realize they were exposing their motives through their own words until it was too late. Because when someone is busy trying to win, they stop being careful, they stop being strategic. They leak the truth without meaning to. You don't react to their emotional triggers or get dragged into their tactics. You watch how they handle their own contradictions. You watch how quickly they switch from confident to defensive. You watch the excuses they jump to when they notice you're actually paying attention. That's why they eventually admit you're a psychological warfare master. Not because you attacked them, but because you saw through them without trying. People feel safe around someone who argues loudly, but someone who stays calm, grounded, and observant, someone who doesn't need to prove themselves, that's terrifying. It removes all the shadows they hide in. They realized you don't defeat people with words. You defeat illusions with clarity. And clarity doesn't shout. It just stands there, quietly connecting dots no one thought you were noticing. You weren't trying to expose them, but your awareness made them expose themselves. That's a kind of power you don't announce. It announces itself the moment someone realizes their whole performance fell apart under the weight of your attention. Number 2, you don't manipulate people. You let their true nature collapse under its own weight. People love to believe they're harder to read than they really are. They build complicated stories about themselves, dress their intentions in polite language, and try to convince the world that there's something solid and trustworthy. But the truth always shows up in the small details. The way they react when they're not getting what they want, the excuses they reach for when things don't go their way, or the frustration that slips out when they feel exposed. You never forced any of this out of them. You simply allowed their behavior to breathe long enough for the mask to crack on its own. The misunderstanding they had about you came from the fact that they expected resistance. They expected pushback, arguments, drama, and emotional fireworks. They came prepared for a battle you never agreed to fight. They were ready to manipulate, pressure, interrupt, or twist things because that's the environment where their tactics usually succeed. But when someone meets them with calm observation instead of emotional reaction, everything they're hiding starts showing without them noticing. You don't manipulate because you don't need to. You let the truth reveal itself at its own pace. That's what makes people uneasy around you. Not fear, but exposure. You're not sculpting their behavior. Their own patterns, motives, and insecurities shape the outcome. They end up confessing what they never planned to reveal simply because you gave their nonsense enough space to contradict itself. And the more their actions clash with their words, the heavier the truth becomes. At some point, their whole performance collapses under the pressure of reality they tried to avoid. That collapse has nothing to do with you being manipulative. It's the natural result of who they are when they're not performing. You weren't playing a game, they were. You just stayed still long enough for their strategy to fall apart. And when it did, they labeled you a psychological warfare master, because they finally saw what you saw from the beginning. Their real nature was telling on them long before their mouth did. Number 3, your detachment stripped away. Their ability to hide behind drama. Most people thrive in chaos because chaos gives them cover. Arguments, emotional outbursts, and manipulative tactics are shields they rely on to protect themselves from scrutiny. The louder they are, the less anyone sees the cracks in their character. But when you step into a space and refuse to engage with the theatrics, something strange happens. The shields crumble. They expect reaction, escalation, or at least a show of emotion, but instead you remain grounded, neutral, untouchable in your calm. Their usual tricks, the ones that work on everyone else, stop functioning. The drama that normally grants them invisibility suddenly exposes everything they've been trying to hide. Your detachment doesn't come from apathy, it comes from awareness. You're not ignoring them because you don't care. You're observing, letting their patterns become obvious, letting their own actions speak louder than anything they could say. When someone realizes that no amount of yelling, guilt-tripping, or manipulation will shift you, panic sets in. The chaos that once protected them now becomes a spotlight, highlighting every inconsistency, every lie, every insecurity. What they experience in that moment is disorienting. They're used to controlling the narrative with noise and emotional pressure, but suddenly there's no narrative for them to control. You didn't pull any strings. You didn't escalate. You simply refused to participate in the illusion. And that refusal forces them to confront themselves. Their insecurity, their need for validation, their attempts to dominate the situation, all of it stands naked because your detachment acts like a mirror they can't turn away from. They begin to overthink, overcompensate, and ultimately betray themselves without realizing it. By simply not being drawn into their chaos, you reveal more than any argument ever could. Your calm becomes a tool, a subtle yet undeniable pressure that unmasks them. And that is why they end up admitting, often reluctantly, that you're a psychological warfare master. Not because you attacked, but because you let them crumble under the weight of their own drama. Number 4, you didn't outsmart them. They outsmarted themselves, trying to outsmart you. People who operate with hidden motives usually assume everyone else thinks like they do. They walk into situations calculating, scheming, and prepare encounters for battles no one asked them to fight. When someone like that crosses paths with a person who is simply genuine and observant, their entire strategy works against them. They think they're being clever, but every step they take reveals more than they intend. Every lie they tell creates another hole in their story. Every attempt to stay 2 steps ahead puts them 5 steps behind, because they're reacting to problems that don't exist. Problems you never planned to create. You never tried to trap them. You didn't need mental gymnastics to deal with them. You weren't secretly tracking their every move or plotting the perfect comeback. You were just being yourself, responding naturally, and paying attention without forcing anything. Meanwhile, they were exhausting themselves trying to predict your next move, believing you had some grand plan. Their overthinking became their downfall. Their paranoia turned into a spotlight on their intentions. They exposed their insecurities without you saying a word. The entire time, they believed they were reading you, when in reality, they were only revealing themselves. Their need to stay ahead kept them talking too much, defending too much, explaining too much. They interpreted your calm as strategy, your silence as calculation, and your patience as manipulation. But none of that was true. They weren't losing a battle to you. They were losing a battle to their own assumptions. And once they realized that you weren't playing the game they prepared for, the embarrassment hit them harder than any confrontation ever could. They understood that everything they feared you were doing, they were actually doing to themselves. That's why they walk away calling you a psychological warfare master. Not because you outsmarted them, but because their own tactics collapsed in front of someone who didn't need tactics at all. Number 5, they confessed your power because you never tried to prove it. Most people measure influence by how loudly someone asserts themselves. They think power needs to be demonstrated with words, actions, or a show of force. They expect the mastermind to be obvious, to flex, to command attention. But you operate differently. Your power isn't performed. It exists quietly, effortlessly, and without announcement. And that is what terrifies and fascinates people at the same time. When someone sees you moving through life with certainty, precision, and self-possession, without the usual need for validation, they can't help but notice. They confessed your power because you weren't performing. You weren't trying to impress, manipulate, or intimidate. You didn't need to. Your awareness, your understanding of situations and people, and your ability to stay grounded in chaos all broadcast something stronger than any boast ever could. It's subtle, but it hits harder than noise, because it signals that you are untouchable in ways they cannot compete with. People who rely on tricks, loud gestures, and manipulation assume everyone else operates the same way. They expect your brilliance to be loud and visible. When it isn't, they begin to overthink, to panic, and to misread the situation. The confession comes from a place of vulnerability. They realize they misjudged you, and in that realization, they inadvertently reveal their awe. They notice the way you never flinch under pressure, how you don't need applause, and how your actions and decisions carry weight without explanation. Your restraint and calmness make them confront their own insecurities and limitations. They see that you hold a kind of influence that can't be bought, faked, or stolen. It just exists because you exist. Ultimately, the reason they admit you are a psychological warfare master is that true mastery doesn't scream. It simply is. And when someone realizes that, they have no choice but to acknowledge it, often out loud, often with the shock of recognizing a force far beyond their control or comprehension. That quiet, undeniable presence is what makes you extraordinary. Number 6, you triggered their survival instinct. Simply by being unpredictable. People rely heavily on patterns to feel safe. They want to know what someone will do next, so they can prepare their reactions, plan their responses, and protect their ego. When someone can predict your behavior, they feel in control. But when you move in a way that doesn't fit their usual categories, not emotional enough to manipulate, not reactive enough to provoke, not predictable enough to pin down, it shakes them to their core. Your unpredictability wasn't intentional. It's simply the result of being authentic while they were performing. They couldn't tell whether you were 3 steps ahead or not even playing the same game. One moment you were calm, the next moment detached, and then completely unbothered by something they thought would upset you. This inconsistency wasn't chaos. It was the kind of self-possession that can't be rehearsed. And the more they tried to anticipate your reactions, the more their own reactions exposed them. Their nervousness wasn't about you being dangerous. It was about them being unable to manage the image they were trying to project. Unpredictability, especially when it comes from someone observant, feels like a threat. Not a physical one, but a psychological one. It destabilizes people who depend on control to hide their true intentions. They start overthinking every word they say around you. They become careful, overly cautious, even paranoid. Because if they can't read you, they can't manipulate you. And when someone can't manipulate a situation, they lose their confidence. What unsettled them most was that you weren't trying to be unpredictable. You weren't playing hard to read or acting mysterious. You were simply being real, thoughtful, selective, and unbothered. And authenticity is the hardest behavior for controlling people to decode. They ended up confessing your psychological power because their own reactions gave them away. They felt exposed in your presence, not because you pushed them, but because the unpredictability of your energy forced them to face the parts of themselves they usually keep hidden. They realized they couldn't control you, and for people like them, that feels like the ultimate threat. Number 7, your presence made them realize their tactics. Only work on the unaware. Most people operate under the assumption that everyone responds the same way they do. They rely on manipulation, guilt, subtle pressure, and predictable reactions to get what they want. Their tactics are rehearsed, refined, and tested on those who are unaware or too distracted to notice. That's why when they encounter someone who actually sees through the facade, the effect is shocking. Your presence alone exposes the truth. Their strategies, which normally succeed effortlessly, fail spectacularly in front of someone who isn't blind, naive, or easily swayed. You don't need to counter them with equal force or clever tricks. Simply being attentive, grounded, and consistent is enough to dismantle the illusion they rely on. They start to panic without even realizing why, because everything they counted on to control the situation collapses. Their rehearsed lines lose meaning. Their subtle manipulations get called out, not with aggression, but with quiet observation. They realize their influence only works when the other person isn't fully conscious of what's happening. In your presence, nothing stays hidden. It's not about fighting them or proving a point. It's about showing them, through your steady composure, that their usual advantage no longer exists. They notice the way you respond with precision rather than reaction, how you pick up patterns and contradictions effortlessly, and how their attempts at control seem almost laughable against someone who refuses to be played. The frustration builds, and that's when they start to admit, sometimes openly, sometimes reluctantly, that you are operating on a level they can't touch. By simply existing as someone aware and unshakable, you force them to confront their own incompetence. Their tactics aren't weak because they're inherently flawed. They're weak because they were designed to exploit ignorance, and you are not ignorant. That realization hits harder than confrontation ever could. They recognize, often in disbelief, that you're a psychological warfare master, not because you attacked them, but because your presence alone made them irrelevant in the game they thought they were winning. Number 8, you never fought back. You allowed truth to fight for you. People are used to conflict taking a certain shape. They expect yelling, arguments, defensiveness, and emotional reactions. They're prepared to twist words, shift blame, and create confusion because that's where they feel most powerful. But when someone refuses to step into that arena, everything changes. That's exactly what you did. You didn't defend yourself the way they hoped. You didn't get angry. You didn't take the bait. You let the truth sit between you both like a quiet force they couldn't escape. And truth, when left alone, does more damage than any confrontation ever could. Your choice to not fight back wasn't weakness. It was strategy without trying to be strategic. When someone knows they're guilty or hiding something, silence becomes the loudest proof. Your calmness cornered them. Your refusal to react removed every excuse they were ready to use. They couldn't call you irrational. They couldn't claim you misunderstood. They couldn't pretend you twisted things. You didn't give them anything to push against, so their own behavior became the only thing left to examine. The truth works slowly but effectively. It exposes patterns. It highlights contradictions. It puts pressure on every lie they told. And because you didn't interfere with that process, their own actions began to reveal everything they tried to cover. They wanted you to play the villain so they could play the victim, but you left no room for that. They had to face the impact of what they did without distraction, without drama, and without someone else to blame. And that's when the fear sets in, when someone realizes you don't need revenge or retaliation. You have reality on your side. They begin confessing things you never asked them to explain. They become nervous, overly apologetic, or defensive without reason. They expose themselves trying to protect themselves. You didn't win through force, you won through clarity. They ended up calling you a psychological warfare master, not because you attacked them, but because you let the truth stand unopposed. And nothing is more intimidating than a person who trusts truth to do the work while they remain unshaken. Number 9, you broke their confidence by revealing you were never dependent on their validation. Most people operate under the illusion that influence comes from control, manipulation, or the ability to elicit a reaction. They believe that if someone responds to them, they hold power. But you shattered that assumption simply by not needing them at all. You moved through situations with independence, clarity, and focus, showing that your actions, choices, and emotions were never contingent on their approval. That realization hits harder than any confrontation because it strips away the subtle authority they thought they held. When someone realizes you are untethered from their opinions or expectations, panic sets in. Their usual tactics, guilt, persuasion, flattery, pressure, become ineffective. They start questioning everything they thought gave them leverage over you. Suddenly, the control they depended on is gone, leaving them exposed, unsure, and off balance. They scramble to regain a foothold, but there isn't one. The more they attempt to assert influence, the more obvious their desperation becomes. Your detachment from their validation doesn't come from arrogance. It comes from alignment. You know who you are, what you want, and what boundaries you won't cross. That kind of self-possession is a mirror they can't look into without confronting their own insecurities. They realize that your confidence isn't borrowed. It's innate. They can't shake you because your stability isn't dependent on them. And that's exactly why they end up admitting your psychological mastery. You didn't have to manipulate, argue, or react. You simply existed in a state of self-sufficiency that highlighted their dependency. In trying to maintain control over you, they exposed themselves as insecure, needy, and predictable. Every effort to influence you only underscored the truth. You answer to no one, and your peace, your power, and your trajectory are entirely your own. Breaking someone's confidence doesn't require cruelty or confrontation. It only requires demonstrating that you are untouchable in the ways that matter, emotionally, mentally, and strategically. That's a quiet kind of dominance they can't help but notice, and it's why they call you a psychological warfare master without you ever having to prove a thing. Number 10, your calm wasn't peace, it was precision. People often mistake calmness for passivity or weakness. They assume someone who doesn't overreact, yell, or push back is either uninterested or incapable of defending themselves. But your calm isn't accidental, and it isn't naive. It's deliberate, calculated, and precise. You're fully aware of the environment, the people in it, and the patterns of behavior unfolding around you. That awareness allows you to move through situations with an unshakable steadiness that feels almost unnatural to those who thrive on chaos. Your calm isn't about ignoring what's happening. It's about controlling your response to it. While others act first and think later, you observe, measure, and anticipate without giving away your hand. Every word you speak, every pause you take, and every action you make is measured, intentional, and strategically placed. You don't need to raise your voice to assert authority or to make a point. Your presence alone communicates that you understand more than they do, and that you are several moves ahead without even appearing to move at all. What unnerves people most is that your precision exposes their flaws in real time. Their lies, inconsistencies, and manipulations don't require confrontation to be revealed. Your calmness shines a spotlight on them. When someone expects chaos and instead finds clarity, they panic. They search for something to provoke you, only to realize nothing works. That panic forces them to act erratically, often against their own interests, and in doing so, they reveal more than they intended. Your precision under calmness is a form of invisible influence. It makes people second-guess themselves, miscalculate, and ultimately reveal truths they were trying to hide. They start acknowledging your insight without you ever having to boast or prove it. The effect is subtle, quiet, but undeniable. Your calm is not about peace, it's about mastery. It's the awareness and timing that lets truth work in your favor, letting you win silently while they stumble under the weight of their own missteps. That is why they recognize your psychological dominance, not in what you do, but in how effortlessly you let life unfold on your terms. Number 11, you don't intimidate with fear, you intimidate with clarity. Most people believe power comes from being loud, aggressive, or threatening. They assume intimidation requires fear, tension, or visible control. But the kind of influence you carry doesn't need any of that. You intimidate because you see clearly. You observe patterns, motives, and weaknesses that others try to hide. And you respond in ways that expose them without ever raising your voice. People feel threatened not because you're aggressive, but because you understand things about them that they are desperate to keep hidden. Clarity is a strange kind of weapon. It doesn't shout or demand attention, but it leaves people unsettled because they can't manipulate what you perceive. When someone realizes that you notice everything, from their hidden insecurities to the lies they tell themselves, panic sets in. They expect confusion, misdirection, or weakness to work on you. And when it doesn't, their entire sense of control crumbles. Your understanding makes them nervous because it doesn't require action or confrontation. It's already there, calm and undeniable, reflecting back exactly what they are and how transparent they've been. What makes this form of intimidation so powerful is that it's almost invisible. You don't need to corner them or challenge them directly. Your awareness does all the work. They start to overthink, stumble over words, second-guess motives, and expose contradictions just by existing in your presence. Every attempt to regain control only highlights their own shortcomings, while your clarity remains untouched. People admit your psychological mastery because they recognize that your power isn't performative. It's not a trick, a bluff, or a show of dominance. It's the quiet, unshakable understanding that allows you to see the truth of every situation, even when others are desperate to mask it. Fear can be challenged, lies can be repeated, but clarity exposes everything, and that is what makes people acknowledge your influence. You don't need to scare anyone. You just need to see, understand, and act with precision, and the results speak louder than any display of aggression ever could. Number 12, you didn't expose them. They exposed their fear of being exposed. People live behind masks, carefully constructed narratives, and rehearsed behaviors designed to keep them looking competent, confident, and in control. They believe they are protecting themselves, but those masks are fragile. The moment someone like you enters their space, fully aware and unconcerned with pleasing them, the pressure on their facade becomes unbearable. You don't have to attack, point fingers, or reveal their secrets. All you do is exist with honesty, precision, and composure, and their own fear begins to betray them. When someone is worried about being exposed, their anxiety shows in subtle ways. A shift in tone, an unnecessary explanation, a defensiveness that doesn't fit the situation. These reactions aren't caused by you. They are caused by the cracks in their own story. Your presence amplifies it. They become hyper-conscious of their behavior, trying to fix, justify, or redirect in ways that only make the truth more obvious. You don't intervene, and yet every movement, every word, and every hesitation they make reveals more than you ever could. It's fascinating to watch because it doesn't feel like confrontation, yet it's more powerful than any argument. They are revealing themselves, not under threat, but because their own mind and ego are collapsing under the weight of the awareness they sense in you. They realize that you are not someone to fool or manipulate, and that understanding terrifies them more than any direct challenge. The exposure comes from within, not from your action. You're simply the presence that forces authenticity, intentionally or not. That's why people end up admitting your psychological mastery. They recognize that you didn't have to do anything to break their image or challenge their control. They broke themselves trying to hide from a truth they couldn't escape. And in that realization, they feel the undeniable weight of your insight. Your power isn't in pushing or attacking. It's in allowing them to confront their own reflection. And in doing so, they reveal themselves far more effectively than you ever could. Number 13, you shattered their illusion of control, simply by refusing to be controlled. Control is an addiction for some people. They rely on manipulating others, influencing situations, and bending narratives to suit their needs. It gives them a false sense of power, a belief that they can shape reality to their liking. But when they meet someone who refuses to play by their rules, who doesn't respond to pressure, guilt, or intimidation, their entire sense of authority crumbles. That refusal is subtle, almost invisible, but it cuts deeper than any argument or confrontation ever could. By simply being unmovable, you expose the illusion they've been clinging to. When someone realizes they can't push you, prod you, or provoke you, panic sets in. They scramble for a foothold, trying strategies that usually work, only to find that nothing has the desired effect. Every attempt to influence you backfires, revealing their dependence on control rather than strength. They begin to overcompensate, over-explain, and overreact, exposing the cracks in their carefully curated persona. The more they try to regain the upper hand, the more obvious their vulnerability becomes. Your refusal to be controlled doesn't require confrontation or aggression. It's quiet, consistent, and non-negotiable. It demonstrates that your boundaries, decisions, and mental space are not up for debate. That alone forces them to confront a reality they weren't prepared for. The world doesn't bend to their whims, at least not in your presence. They are forced to reckon with their own limitations, their dependence on manipulation, and the fact that they overestimated their influence. By staying grounded and self-possessed, you make them irrelevant in the games they usually win. Their sense of control shatters, not because you attacked it, but because you never handed them a chance to hold it. That's why they admit you are a psychological warfare master. Your power lies not in domination, but in refusal. The refusal to let someone else dictate your mind, your actions, or your peace. And that simple act exposes them in ways no words ever could. Number 14, they called you a psychological warfare master because you forced them to face themselves. People rarely see themselves clearly. Most live in a fog of denial, excuses, and justifications, carefully constructing identities that hide their weaknesses and mask their fears. They believe that the world is what they make it, and anyone who challenges that narrative is an adversary. But when someone like you enters their life, they don't just face a person. They face the reflection of their own choices, insecurities, and contradictions. And that is terrifying, because you didn't have to push, argue, or manipulate to make it happen. You simply existed in alignment with your own truth, and in doing so, you held up a mirror they couldn't ignore. The reason they call you a psychological warfare master isn't because you plan to dominate them. It's because your presence exposes the truth they've been avoiding. Their defenses crumble not under attack, but under the weight of their own awareness. They notice how effortless you are, how grounded, how unbothered by chaos or manipulation, and it makes them realize how inconsistent and reactive they've been. Every excuse, every lie, every attempt to control or manipulate becomes glaringly obvious in contrast to your clarity. What they feel is a mixture of awe and fear, not of you, but of themselves. They are confronted with aspects of their character and behavior that they've denied, hidden, or rationalized for years. They realize they can't manipulate you the way they manipulate others, and that reflection makes them uncomfortable because it's impossible to escape. You never needed to fight, argue, or prove anything. Your mastery came from being fully present, fully aware, and fully aligned with yourself. That alignment forced them to reconcile with their own choices, actions, and intentions, something they weren't ready to do. In that moment of exposure, they had no choice but to acknowledge your power. They called you a psychological warfare master because the battle was never with you. The battle was with themselves, and you were the force that refused to let them hide. That is the essence of true mastery, not domination over others, but the ability to make the truth undeniable. Conclusion. Being a psychological warfare master isn't about being loud, aggressive, or manipulative. It's about seeing clearly, acting deliberately, and moving through life with a presence that exposes truth without ever raising a hand. It's about letting people reveal themselves while you remain grounded, allowing their own patterns, contradictions, and insecurities to speak louder than any argument ever could. You don't fight, you observe. You don't manipulate, you illuminate. You don't need validation because your power comes from alignment with yourself, not from the opinions of others. Every action, every choice, and every moment of calm you display becomes a silent force. It breaks illusions, shatters false confidence, and forces others to face themselves, often in ways they never imagined possible. People recognize your mastery not because you attacked them or tried to dominate, but because your awareness, detachment, and precision make it impossible for them to hide. They see what you see, and in that exposure, they admit your power. That's the mark of a true chosen one. Your presence alone rewrites the rules of engagement, leaving those around you to contend with truths they've long avoided. If this breakdown resonated with you, if it gave you insight into how the chosen ones operate and the silent mastery you can embody, don't just leave it here. Subscribe to the channel for more content that sharpens your perception, strengthens your mind, and elevates your understanding of human dynamics. Like this video if it opened your eyes, comment to share your experiences, and share it with anyone who needs to see the power of presence in action. Step into your mastery, because the world notices those who refuse to be anything less than extraordinary. Stay blessed always.